Hello, friends. Welcome to your Motivational Gen Z and Millennial Expert podcast. I am your host. My name is Dr. Jason Wiggins, and it is great to be here today where we break down the leadership blueprint for career growth, motivation, and workplace success in today's modern working world. Before we begin this episode, I want to intentionally ask you to take one action right now. If this podcast has ever helped you gain clarity, direction, or confidence in your career, I want you to share it with someone in your life who is quietly struggling with leadership, burnout, confusion, or workplace pressure. Because awareness is not passive. Awareness changes how you think, and how you think, how you move in your career. When you think about those changes and how you think, those changes will impact you as you move in your career. I also want to sincerely thank you for being here today. Whether you are a Gen Z professional trying to understand your real job, your first real job, or a millennial carrying leadership responsibilities while managing pressures, expectations, fatigue, your effort to understand your environment already puts you ahead of most people by listening to this podcast. And I want to remind you of something important before we begin. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are ultimately learning how systems in the workplace work. And that understanding becomes extreme power over time. Now, let's begin. Let me begin with something that may make you feel a little uneasy, uncomfortable, but it's really something many Gen Z and millennials already sense in the workplace today. Leadership is losing trust faster than it knows how to build it. Think about this. Millennials, Gen Z, from politicians to workplace bosses, leaders. Leadership is now losing trust faster than it knows how to rebuild it. And I am not talking about frustration or normal workplace stress that you feel. I am talking about a deeper shift in a perception that is happening in real time as we speak. Gen Z and millennials are still showing up to work. You're still performing. And you're still delivering results. But emotionally, many of you are no longer connected to leadership. And here is the key truth. This is not about disengagement from your ambition. It is not disengagement from any of your inconsistencies, because you are no longer trusting what leadership is stating. You are no longer trusting. And when there is a gap between their words and your reality, something predictable happens. The first is doubt. The doubt you feel because you know there's no transparency, no consistency in the message within that leader. And then after doubt comes your disengagement. This is your emotional exit long before you turn in your final resignation. But here is the motivational truth hidden inside this reality. The moment you begin to recognize that gap, something most people never develop, it's discernment. And discernment is what protects you from issues that you have, and ultimately protects your long-term career goals. Now, before we talk about your workplace today, we need to understand how leadership trust is built, and then on the flip side, how it's destroyed. Because patterns repeat themselves in every generation. Maybe in a different way, maybe with different technologies. Obviously, we are much more in depth than we were 50 years ago. So we have to start thinking about how patterns continue to repeat themselves and how we can break that repetition and be aware of that. Let's begin with one of the most important leadership failures in modern corporate history. And if you've never heard of it, feel free to Google the company Enron. Enron was one of the early onsets of where leadership really began to falter and ultimately fail. It was seen as one of the most innovative, successful companies in America. From the outside, everything looked powerful, stable, and unstoppable. Executives were praised. Growth was celebrated throughout. There were parties, there were excitement, there were we can't do anything wrong type of attitude. And success appeared undeniable. But internally, leadership was not managing reality. They were managing the perception of what everybody believed outside the organization. And that is where the collapse began. Kenneth Lay was the founder and long-term CEO of Enron. He was celebrated as a rock star. He was respected in the corporate and the political circles and was seen as a symbol of stability and credibility. Ultimately, his leadership failure was not ignorance. It was the tolerance of deception. He allowed a culture to grow where image became more important than the truth. Even when internal warnings increased, he continued projecting confidence externally. His leadership failure was simple but critical. He chose to protect reputation instead of correcting reality. And when leadership protects image over truth, problems do not dissipate. They do not disappear. They compound silently until an unavoidable collapse occurs. So Enron did not collapse because people lacked leadership. It collapsed because leadership removed the truth from safety. And when truth is unsafe, it disappears. And when truth disappears, inside leadership, reality then collapses next. But here is the underlying motivation when you look at what happened to Enron. You learn about what happened and realize that it was such a fault in leadership. When you learn to recognize environments where truth is unsafe, you develop one of the most powerful career skills possible. And that is awareness before involvement. And that skill protects you within your career, your future. It's about being aware of your surroundings. I always like to say that ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance doesn't protect you. You have to be aware of surrounding yourself with good people, good leaders, good employees, and developing and enhancing that leadership that is around you. But when you bring this into the real world about the failures in the workplace, because patterns are not history, they are still happening in different forms today. Every workplace has this type of person I'm going to describe. They have the reliable Gen Z or millennial employee. The one who solves problems, the one who works late, the one who carries emotional and the operation pressure when things fail. At first, this is rewarding. But over time, the reality of that employee, and that may be you. That may be you. And guess what? That reliability becomes your expectation within your boss's inner circle, the leadership inner circle. And then expectation becomes that silent pressure of you to continue to perform even when the people around you may not. Because you will never refuse a task. You receive more work. All that work compounds. And then you continue to perform at a consistent level. Then you're given more responsibility because you don't complain. But then at some point, you get tired, you get burned out. And here is the motivational truth. Reliability without boundaries becomes self-sacrifice instead of success. The poor leadership has now taken advantage of you because they know that you're going to rise to the occasion. They know that you're going to do what you need to do. This is structured for long-time performance when boundaries are not known as weaknesses. So eventually, you decide, I'm going to disconnect. I'm done with this. I don't feel like I'm appreciated. I feel like I'm mentally stressed. I'm emotionally stressed. And then at some point, the leadership notices that you're not performing at the level you were. And believe it or not, they begin to wonder why. That is where there's a disconnect with the leadership, with the expectations. And what happens at that point? At that point, you have a total collapse. And by the time leadership notices that you're emotionally stressed, you've checked out, it's too late. It's too late. But that's why a good leader, a leader that understands the perception and doesn't ignore the safety balances that they should have in place to protect you from being overworked, to protect you from poor leadership. Now let's talk about what Gen Z and millennials are actively rejecting in today's workplace and why that rejection is actually a sign of intelligence and not resistance. Gen Z and millennials are no longer responding to performative culture because they are not judging culture based on words. You're not judging culture based on words. It's based behavior under pressure. Culture is revealed when all the dynamics within your organization are tested, which includes workloads increasing, pressures rising. Leadership is forced to respond in real time. I'd like to share an example when teams communicate burnout clearly. First, they request support. They ask for change, but instead they receive gestures such as appreciation, events. They fix certain things. And while intention may be positive within the organization, the perception is misalignment. Because you are not asking for recognition. You're asking for change. You recognize that the difference is critical for long-term success. So that's why leadership needs to realize that for Gen Zs and millennials, for you to be successful out in the workplace as you grow your career, it's not about the workload. It's not about ultimately the recognition that you think you deserve. It is about awareness and being able to project positive aspects within your job. You want to share your experiences. You want to be a big part of the organization. You want to be empowered. These are some of the key components that successful career leaders want to be a part of. You might be at the beginning of your career or in the middle of your career, but I want to ask you this question. If you could change anything right now, if you could change anything within your leadership component or those that lead you and how they lead you, what would that be? Do you think it's a minor adjustment? Is it a transparency issue where maybe they're not being transparent about how you can be successful and how you can help and how they can be a better leader? Let's talk about that transparency and what actually builds trust. You are not unaware employees. Gen Z and millennials are not unaware employees. Actually, you're very aware of your surroundings. You've been on all the social medias. You've been born with a computer in your paws or a laptop or an iPad in your hands, and you've had all of the media consumed within the time you've became aware. So I understand, and leaders should also understand, you are aware of everything that goes around you. You see patterns instantly. You're able to connect the dots. You can see when somebody is not being transparent. You detect that inconsistency of the message of how the organization is really coming across. And this is not a secret. And then you think about silently, what are they trying to pull over from me? What is the wool being pulled over my eyes? And that's where that message doesn't drive home what's truly important, what's truly focused. Are they focused only on top line growth, or are they focused on the employee? I've seen some great organizations that they are internally focused on the employee, even more so than the customers. Why? Because when you're focused on the employees, that will resonate where you will then impact your customers. You're going to be able to focus on what is. They understood what was important regarding how they treated their employees, how they treated their customers, and they understood the dynamics of developing a culture that really is successful, really is nurturing. And so for every company like Enron, there are companies like Southwest Airlines. There's companies like Google. If the communication does not match the reality of what's going on around you, then that trust is instantly broken. Because the internal question becomes very simple. Why are we not being told the truth? And that question becomes a turning point in every leadership relationship. And here's the truth behind that. Once you've learned to recognize the gaps early about the truth within the organization, you stop reacting emotionally and you start responding strategically. And that response will shift and change your entire career trajectory. So when you're able to focus on what's relative, what's real, the culture, the engagement, the surroundings of taking care of the people around you, that is where you find yourself at its very best. But here's the thing. How about a toxic culture? How is that embraced? Well, I can tell you right now, and you can probably agree as you listen, you are not accepting a toxic environment in the same way previous generations did. The baby boomers, Generation X, they were rolling over for toxicity. As long as they received their paycheck, their weekly or bi-weekly or bi-monthly paycheck, they were happy. They were okay. But it's a different world out there. We've seen what's good, what's real, and we've seen what we want out of everything. The truth is, millennials, Gen Z, they're not embedded on the idea of becoming senior leaders because they're so much more important. They know they're going to be working for the next 60 years. You're like, wait a minute, I just started my career. I'm going to live longer and I'm going to be working for the next 60 years. So my focus is on doing something that I'm passionate about, I'm focused on, that's going to really provide me some sort of meaning. And I'm not going to put up with an environment that is toxic, where the culture does not embrace individual success. It's about separating everything, all the noise within that toxicity of that environment. Because once you determine I'm done, I'm out, I cannot take a toxic culture, and you realize that poor leadership environment is not going to change, you are not stuck being in that position. You are learning how you're going to be able to move forward. You're being refined. You're learning the standards of what that poor projection leadership is providing. And you're learning the boundaries. And you're learning what you will never accept again. And that awareness is not just survival. It's preparation. When we talk about poor leadership, think about this for the moment. When you look back at your career or mentors you've had, what really stood out? Was it the great leadership that stood out? What did you take out of that? So as you continue to focus on your career and be successful in whatever you're doing, what are some of those key elements that you took out of those situations? How can you change a poor situation now and then transfer that into something that's going to help you become successful in a similar situation? How are you going to respond? That is the learning experiences that we have over time. And that's why experience counts in so many ways. A lot of times you see senior leaders as they get older. It's not because they continue to have this great found knowledge. It's about the experiences that they've had before that have put them in that leadership position. And that's where your focus can really transform, to make sure you're transparent to your team, you're developing a good culture, and you're embracing and engaging your employees. Your employees are the number one thing besides your customers. Or you can take it vice versa. But if you're taking care of your employees, who will then take care of your customers at the highest degree. So Gen Z and millennials are no longer tolerating the environments in the same way previous generations did. And that is going to be important as you continue to move forward. So in this episode, it's about not letting you fall down that rabbit hole when it comes to accepting poor leadership. You know, if you feel like this has made an impact on you, share it with someone who needs that clarity. Share it with someone in leadership who needs awareness. So becoming aware is the first step towards transformation. So share it with someone in leadership who needs that awareness. And if you are in leadership, pay attention to the silence of your workforce, because silence is not agreement. And if you take one thing from this entire episode, take this: trust is not optional anymore. It's not soft. It's not secondary. It is the foundation of leadership today. And once it breaks, everything else surrounding you the organization, the leadership becomes temporary. I want to thank everybody for your continued support. We'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye.